cette séance. Bienvenue à nouveau dans la réunion numéro
I
98.
call back this meeting to order. Welcome back to meeting number 98 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport Infrastructure Committee, suspended from Thursday, February 1st, 2024. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, the committee meets to discuss on its study on the role of McKinsey & Company in the creation and beginning of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders of the House of Commons, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application.
Feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injury. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of our interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. Colleagues, we will now resume the debate on the motion moved by Dr. Leslyn Lewis, which has been distributed to all members, both physically in the room as well as by email. And we left off in the discussion on the amendment proposed by Mr. Badaway to Dr. Lewis's motion. Start the debate off with Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be back. It was a couple years that I served on this committee. I guess before I begin, I would like to seek unanimous consent from the committee to take Vance's amendment off the table, to remove his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Do we have unanimous consent to remove the amendment proposed by Mr. Badaway? I see no objection. So adopted.
Excellent. Well, I have an amendment of my own, Mr. Chair, and there's a bit of a delay on the mic getting, maybe not. Okay. My apologies. So.
Nope, you're right, Mr. Biddle. There is a delay. There's an echo, actually, that we hear in the room here. So we'll just.
And that's too many for.
That's debate, Mr. Backrack.
Okay.
That's debate.
He was only seconds long.
Okay.
So they're turning the volume down in the room here, Mr. Biddle. So
Okay.
Give it a couple seconds, and then once I get the okay, we'll see whether or not that's worked.
And apologize to Mr. Backrack, because one Chris Biddle can often be too much for a committee. So.
You know what? We'll suspend for about a minute or two just to make sure that the sound crew can get things sorted out. The meeting is suspended. Colleagues, for your patience as we sorted that out. So I believe we have rectified the sound issue. Mr. Biddle, I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you very much. Move an amendment, and we'll send the language to the clerk to distribute. The amended motion will read, given that the Canada Infrastructure Bank spent nearly $900,000 in consulting fees on the Lake Erie Connector project, that the Standing Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities undertake a study of the Canada Infrastructure Bank's involvement in the Lake Erie Connector project, that the committee hold 3 meetings to hear from witnesses on the topic, and that the committee invite the Minister of Infrastructure and Infrastructure Canada officials to appear as part of the study. And we'll send that language to the clerk so that it can be distributed to everyone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biddle. I'm just going to look at our members who are joining us online here to wonder whether or not they want us to suspend for 2 minutes until such time as they receive the amendment in both official languages. That work for you, Mr. Strahl and Mr. Rogers?
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we'll suspend for a couple of minutes until we make sure that all members have access to the amendment. Thank you. Meeting is now suspended. Just want to confirm to our colleagues joining us online that they have indeed received the amended motion. Thumbs up.
Just.
Okay. So discussion, comments, colleagues, on the amended motion. Mr. Biddle, did you want to speak to it, perhaps? And then Mr. Strahl.
Just very quickly, I think this is just an effort to get to the main sticking point was some of the wording. I think the main point that the opposition wants to see is the minister coming. He's happy to come. That's in the motion, and that we continue the study, maybe perhaps taking out a few of the inflammatory words that are in there, but I think it still is the heart of the original motion, and hopefully we can pass this and move on to other business.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Mr. Strahl.
Yeah, given that we did get, I think, 3 different versions of the amendment, and we just got the correct one just a minute ago, I would ask that we have a few minutes to suspend and consider the actual text that we just received and compare it against the original and come back to discuss this more fully, given we didn't have it all of that time until just before you brought the hammer back down. So I would request a short suspension so that we can discuss.
Okay, Mr. Strahl. We're talking 5-10 minutes. That work for you?
Tops, yeah.
Sounds good. So the meeting will suspend for 5 to 10 minutes, at which time we'll resume to continue discussion on the amendment proposed by Mr. Biddle. This meeting is now suspended. I call this meeting back to order. I will turn the floor over to Mr. Strahl for any comments, questions regarding the amendment put forward by Mr. Biddle. Mr. Strahl.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Biddle for his amendment. I think we are close to having agreement here on how to proceed. We can address the sanitization of the version in the actual meetings if we do agree to this. I would say, however, that we would like to see specific reference to an invitation to the CEO and officials from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I note that Mr. Biddle's version does invite the minister, which we are happy with, and his officials, but it did specifically delete the references to Canada Infrastructure Bank's CEO and officials. So I would actually propose a sub-amendment to Mr. Biddle's amendment, Mr. Biddle's amendment, that would read as follows. Given that the Canada Infrastructure Bank, CIB, spent nearly $900,000 in consulting fees on the Lake Erie Connector project, that the Standing Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure, and Communities undertake a study of the Canada Infrastructure Bank's involvement in the Lake Erie Connector project, that the committee hold 3 meetings to hear from witnesses on the topic, and that the committee invite the Minister of Infrastructure and Infrastructure Canada officials, as well as the CEO and officials from the Canada Infrastructure Bank to appear as part of the study. Now, of course, that would simply be an invitation. It simply adds them back in to indicate that this committee would like to hear from the CEO and officials, and I think finds a common ground. We're not prescriptive on hours and minimum meetings, etc. We've even taken out the fact that this committee recommended that the CIB be abolished. So we just have a pretty straightforward motion, but I hope the committee will agree that we can add back in the CEO and officials from the CIB.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Biddle.
I just want to propose we're fine with it, and that can be on consent if the committee's amenable to that.
Okay, I'm looking around. I'm seeing nodding heads approving, so it looks like that is amenable. Any other questions, comments? Oui, Mr. Bastien-Duval.
Peut-être que d'autres membres du comité l'ont remarqué, là, mais il semble que la
Perhaps of the committee members have noticed, but the technical problem doesn't seem to have been solved because we have 2 Mark Strahls, it appears.
That was 10. Right.
That's the way I sound to my wife sometimes. So, okay, colleagues, we're going to suspend for a couple minutes just to get that figured out so that we don't risk injuring our interpreters. The meeting will suspend for a couple minutes. those have been rectified. We left off with Mr. Biddle saying that he was okay with the changes proposed by Mr. Strahl. I think we're all in accordance with those changes. So now we have a revised motion as amended by Mr. Biddle, slightly modified by Mr. Strahl. Colleagues, do we all know what the revised version looks like and sounds like? We don't need to, okay, we're good to go? Okay, so we'll go to a vote. I see no further discussion. I'll turn it over to you, Madam Clerk.
Sure.
Okay, we don't see any objection. We have unanimous consent to adopt the motion as amended. Thank you, colleagues. Yes, Mr. Biddle.
Motion, I move we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Go to the clerk. It's a dilatory motion, so I can't go to Mr. Strahl, unfortunately.
Mr. Biddle? Yes. Monsieur Iacono?
Oui.
Madame Koutrakis?
Oui.
Miss Murray? Miss Murray?
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Strahl?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Miss Gallant? Mr. Lewis?
No.
Monsieur Barcelo-Duval?
No.
Mr. Backrack? Five yeas, 6 nays. Motion is not carried.
The motion does not carry. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Strahl, followed by Mr. Backrack.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know why the French interpretation keeps on coming in, showing up on my screen here as being, yeah, and there again. I think that's your problem with the echo. Anyways, I'll try to move this motion that. Okay. I'm gonna...
Let me just confer here, colleagues. See what we can do. Help move this forward.
Is a longer suspension helpful? Could we go till noon?
Mr. Strahl, just to confirm, do you have a speaker on in the room that you're in right now, or is it only coming through your headset?
No, and I can see when I'm speaking, and again, everyone who's not online won't see this. When it's a problem, the West Block 125 French kicks on, is active. The somehow that, and again, right now it's doing it where I'm speaking, but that is a live line as well. So both the English and I don't know why that is happening that way. But that seems to be when that is an issue.
Okay, colleagues, unfortunately, I mean, we do have to protect the health of our interpreters. As much as I'd like to power through this and, it doesn't sound great for us, but we can power through it to protect their health. We're being advised to suspend and give another opportunity for our audiovisual team here to try and rectify the problem. Mr. Strahl, they're going to contact you directly to see if we can fix that. And then we'll resume once we believe that we fixed it. If we haven't fixed it, we may have to consider perhaps adjourning for the day. So this meeting will be suspended until such time as we fix the audiovisual issue. Back to order once again. Hopefully we've rectified the sound issue once and for all. Mr. Strahl, you had the floor, followed by Mr. Backrack, followed by Mr. Muse. Mr. Strahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the technical staff for their hard work to keep the committee moving. I submitted a notice of motion on Friday, February 2nd. I hope members have a copy of. I will read it now. I intend to move that motion now. The motion states that given that the Port of Montreal, a major hub for stolen vehicles to be shipped out of Canada, only has 5 Canada Border Service agents to inspect the 580,000 containers that leave the port each year, according to Le Journal de Montréal, with one law enforcement agent saying, quote, CBSA has no resources to check the containers. They check less than 1% of containers. The committee report to the House its concern with these reports and calls on the government to immediately address these resource shortages as the CBSA falls under the federal government's mandate. Now, this motion comes out of obviously a Journal de Montréal report, which talks about the involvement of the Port of Montreal, which falls under the mandate of this committee through the Minister of Transport. I would note also that we're hearing reports, or we've had individuals confirm that vehicles that are stolen in the Greater Toronto area are often put on railways, in railway cars, and shipped to the Port of Montreal, where they make their way out of the country on ships. This is clearly something that this committee should express its concern with. When we see a 300% increase in stolen vehicles in the GTA, 100% increase in Montreal, this is clearly part of the system, part of the port is a part of the federal government's responsibility. It's an asset that the federal government is responsible for, and it's being used by organized crime to ship stolen vehicles, Canadian stolen vehicles abroad. So clearly there's a resource issue there. If we're talking about 1% of containers being examined, we need to, I think, take a whole of government approach on this, and that includes tightening up the ports, and that includes expressing our concern with the lack of resources at the Port of Montreal. So I'm hoping we can have a discussion about that, and I think it would be helpful to express that to the House, to let them know that we are monitoring the situation, that we are concerned with the rising problem of auto theft and the Port of Montreal being a conduit for vehicles leaving the country after they've been stolen. So I think this falls well within our mandate. It's something that we should discuss and advise the House of our concern about. So happy to start the discussion and hope we can vote in favor of this today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. I had a speakers list before. I don't know if it's the same group of people that want to be on the speakers list. I see the hand of Mr. Barclay-Duval. Mr. Muse, did you want to speak to this as well? Okay. And Mr. Biddle. So we'll start with Mr. Barclay-Duval. À vous la parole.
OK. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate my colleague's idea of putting in a motion on this question of theft and working with CBSA. I think we are all concerned by this, and there is a study going on right now within Public Safety Committee in order to shed some light on what is not being done and what should be done to correct and rectify this situation. I think we are all deploring that there are so many car thefts and such laissez-faire on the part of the CBSA, such tolerance and just saying, oh, well, what can we do about it? I don't think that we can accept this as an answer. So if the intention is to send a clear message that we are not happy with the situation, I'm perfectly at ease with this. But I feel somehow that we're doubling up the work that's already being done by the public safety group. So I feel that perhaps we should leave them do that job, and we should be concentrating on what we have to do, which is what we had in our agenda today. I was hoping that we would be looking further into the McKinsey report, and I was really hoping that we would be able to pursue this work today. And I would like to be able to deal with this subject as quickly as possible so that we can resume our work. Thank you so much, Mr. Bassalival. Mr. Muse.
So I'd just like to speak in support of this motion. We're talking about not just CBSA and public safety, but this is a federal port. And that is, we know the Port of Montreal is a conduit for, there's 5,800 containers in the Port of Montreal, and less than 1% are scanned. I actually did an order paper question on this prior to Christmas, and the answer came back with exactly that, less than 1% scanned. They actually didn't specify how many cars they thought were actually, or automobiles, the trucks as well, were actually being exported, stolen vehicles, what that number was. The number they were able to retrieve, and that has been static year over year, was somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100. So of the 105,000 plus vehicles that are stolen, a lot of that is happening now in the GTA in Southern Ontario. Less than 1% are being retrieved out of the Port of Montreal. And we know from those that have put Apple AirTags on their vehicles and traced them to the port. In fact, I spoke with a constituent in the fall who was able to track and there was the second vehicle that was stolen from their driveway, was able to track that through the Port of Montreal. And so that is a federal port, and that is a federal responsibility, as is CBSA. And in fact, in my own community this past weekend, there was 2 cars stolen at gunpoint. That's a very violent crime. And in fact, there was another vehicle that was not stolen at that particular, and it was targeted by a very sophisticated organized crime ring. Caused a lot of headlines. The local police are reporting, but their hands are tied because this is something that's going on and being exported through a federal port. And I spoke to one of the neighbors, and this community is living in fear. And in fact, it's a street that I lived on 20 years ago. So this is quite alarming. But it's not an isolated example. This is on top of it's a daily occurrence now in terms of and it's often in the media locally in Hamilton, in the Greater Toronto Area, in Niagara, in Kitchener-Waterloo, out throughout southwestern Ontario. So this is a problem, and I think we should bring, as the motion calls for, CBSA officials and others to answer for this.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much, and I believe Monsieur Bassalival brought up I sit on the Public Safety Committee, and this is before or on the agenda for the Public Safety Committee. Unfortunately, kind of what we're seeing here is the Conservatives will delay. They talk a good game in terms of an important issue of public safety, which this is. I don't think there's anyone here at this table who believes that this isn't fundamentally important. But even though there's a study at public safety, we're seeing Conservatives filibuster day after day after day. We can't get to that study. And here, what do we have? We're taking a headline, and I'm sure it's true, but Conservatives don't want to have a study. They don't want to look into evidence. They just want to make a statement to bring a concurrence motion in the House of Commons to delay debate, to further crippling the House of Commons. This is what this is being used for, not for anything productive, not to get to the bottom of things, not to make a reasonable suggestion. And this is all this motion is to do. even this committee that they're furious about the infrastructure bank and have to find a way to filibuster to get to a report, which is something they want to do. Even their filibusters are conflicting in terms of where they find themselves. So I don't. You can see right through this, and I appreciate that this is a area of fundamental concern for our constituents across the country. But they're not calling for a study. They're just accepting at face value a line from a newspaper report, which again may be true, but they don't want to get to the bottom of it. They don't want to look into things. They just want to have a concurrence debate in the House of Commons to delay legislation that is fundamentally important to Canadians. And again, they don't want to get to the bottom of it. They should really, what they should do is ask their Conservative colleagues on public safety to stop filibustering Bill C-26 so that we can actually get to a study on public safety and speak to not just the CBSA, speak to the RCMP, speak to police chiefs in the Greater Toronto area, speak to port officials. This is, with respect, this is not the effort that I would expect for a party that says this is a crisis. This is making a statement and delaying debate in the House of Commons that will produce no recommendations. And it's sad, actually, in terms of if the Conservatives actually believe it's a serious issue, this is their response, is to filibuster in the committee that's seized of the matter and to have a throwaway motion to in this committee so they can delay debate in the House of Commons, not get any evidence, not listen to the experts, because they have all the answers. Not the RCMP, not CBSA, not local police chiefs. They have all the answers on this, and it's disappointing to see.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Mr. Lewis, followed by Mr. Strahl. Mr. Lewis.
Was that on the list at some point there?
We had a new list started, and I asked for those who wanted to be put on the new list, but I will add your name, Mr. Backrack.
I indicated way early when he started.
Mr. Strahl had his hand up right away, Ms. Gallant.
Okay.
You're right after Mr. Strahl,
Okay.
followed by Mr. Backrack.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me, and I'm sorry to go ahead of everybody else. But I'm honored to do it. So I got about 6 things I'm going to chat about here, but it will not be long. This is not a filibuster, but this is really important stuff. So number one is, as chair of the Conservative Auto Caucus, I have heard this over and over and over from global automakers, from our manufacturers, and you would think that a company that builds vehicles to sell, new vehicles to sell, would actually be somewhat excited that vehicles are leaving Canada in droves. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. They said they completely need action on this, and they need it really, really quickly. Last summer, visited the Port of Vancouver on 2 or 3 various occasions and was right on the shop floor of the port, if you will. And I said to the folks that were driving me around, what are those 8 or 10 containers, shipping containers, doing in the middle of a parking lot next to a very small building? Very small building. And they said those containers are the ones that are to be inspected from the CBSA. I said, you honestly are kidding me, right? Is there radioactive material in there? Or is there something that is illegal that you're aware of? They said, no, that's the ones they took out. Of the tens of thousands of containers that I was looking at on the port site. And it blew my mind. It blew my mind. And I realized that the Port of Vancouver is not the avenue, not the highway for the majority of vehicles that are going overseas. I understand that. But I use that as a factual example that when we have so many containers coming into this country and we don't give our CBSA officers the proper tools or the resources, being people, to look at these, then obviously that only makes sense. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, I live next to the busiest international border crossing in North America, the Ambassador Bridge, soon to be the Gordie Howe International Bridge. And I would have thought that that the majority of this conversation would have been surrounded by those bridges. But I do know that when I cross the bridge quite often, when you go over top the Ambassador Bridge on the right-hand side, you'll see an X-ray location, and so many of these transport vehicles go underneath a mobile X-ray. So it's a transport truck that runs alongside a transport truck with a great big arm that X-rays it, and they find things right down to such as anomalies such as cocaine and marijuana and all the illegal ones that are being exported and imported into Canada. And I have a hard time believing that if they can find something so minute such as these drugs, that they can't see a vehicle or three in a shipping container with an X-ray machine. Which goes on to my point of, why would we not do this study when we realize that folks in Toronto, Montreal, Brampton, down in the Hamilton regions are being so affected by vehicle theft. And it's not only the ones that have their vehicles stolen, Mr. Chair, it's everybody else. $1 billion is what the insurance companies say the rest of us are going to have to pick up the tab for. I know with my children and my wife and my vehicle just how expensive insurance is. And so I think at the very least we should be studying this. Recently, I stopped into a constituent's place and just had a chat with them on a completely unrelated topic. And I said, "So, are you heading anywhere down south for the wintertime?" Husband and wife. I said, "You heading anywhere down south?" Yep. They said, "I'm going to tell you something though, Chris. Here's is kind of interesting." I said, "Sure. What's that?" They said, "We've stayed at the same hotel for a number of years in the Toronto area, right next to the airport. And the gentleman has a Dodge 1500 pickup truck. And he called up the he called up the hotel and said, 'So, as in the past, you have the private parking next door. If I pay an extra couple dollars and I stay there for 2 weeks, then I don't have to pay for parking across the street at the Park and Fly.' And they said, 'Yeah, you're absolutely correct. However, we don't have pickup trucks here anymore. We will not store pickup trucks because the truth of the matter is, in 2 weeks when you come home, it'll likely be stolen.' If that's where we're at now, if that's where Canada has come to, then I think at the very, very least we must study this at committee. I don't see why we wouldn't study this at committee. We are, by the way, the Transport Committee, and I'm in full support of this motion, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the committee's time for allowing me to speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Strahl.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to respond briefly to some things that were said. I've heard from both the Bloc and the Liberals. One saying, we shouldn't study this more in depth because public safety is already dealing with it, and another saying that this a motion expressing concern isn't a fulsome study. So, I think we're hearing both ways, kind of either we're planning to do too much work or not enough work. What this motion does is recognize that there is work happening at the Public Safety Committee, but also recognizes the importance of the Transport Committee weighing in because of the involvement of federal ports. The Port of Montreal is the major highway for stolen vehicles. They are stolen in the GTA, Greater Montreal area, all over Southern Ontario, put on rail cars and shipped to the Port of Montreal, where they are exported by organized crime. And the idea that the Transport Committee shouldn't have anything to say about that. I do have another motion, for another time that does call for a more comprehensive study on the port component of this. However, today, what we're asking is to just simply take note raise our concern, report that to the House. The fact that 1% of containers going through the Port of Montreal are inspected due to a lack of resources. I think we can do this in a way that is respectful of the time of this committee and simply express our concern with that. That's what we're asking for. And I recognize that some people don't want to address this issue or don't want the Transport Committee, which is responsible for ports, which is responsible for railways, which are a key component of how these vehicles are moved once they are stolen. You know, they aren't being driven to the Port of Montreal, or they aren't being, you know, these are using federally regulated assets to move the proceeds of crime. And so the idea that Transport Committee doesn't have a role to play, that we shouldn't be pronouncing on this, I think is absurd. So I think this simply calls for us to report our concern and call on the government to address the resource shortages that are happening. There is it's a very simple motion that will allow us to express our concern with what is happening at the Port of Montreal. This is the best way I think we can do that right away, to say we've heard the reports. I don't think anyone is disputing that the Port of Montreal is a key transportation hub for stolen vehicles. I haven't heard anyone dispute that. So we can bring forward our concern, note it to the government, indicate that we as a committee believe that there are inadequate resources for CBSA at the Port of Montreal, express that concern, and then it's up to the government to respond. It's up to the government to note that concern and have a formal response. So I think we're doing our jobs as member of parliament. We're doing our jobs as members of this committee to express concern when things like the ports and the railways are being used to funnel stolen vehicles out of the country to the benefit of organized crime. So pronouncing on that by way of this motion is the best way to do that. And I don't see any reason why anyone would vote against that unless they don't believe that there are resource shortages, unless they don't believe that CBSA has a role to play, unless they don't believe that our ports and our railways are an important part of this that need to be addressed. So Conservatives believe that we need to address the issue of the Port of Montreal being that conduit for organized crime to get the vehicles that they steal in this country out of the country. If we're not going to address that as a committee, I don't know, we would be failing in our duty to Canadians. So let's vote in favor of this, express our concern to the House, and move on with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. Ms. Gallant, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I shouldn't have been surprised, but talk about the accusation in the mirror of Mr. Biddle accusing us of filibustering. If ever there was an example of filibustering, it was his response to this motion. One thing I've learned very early on here is never assign motive. There are many reasons. Are you interrupting again, Mr. Biddle? So never assign motive, and to think that we are doing this just to get a concurrence motion in the House speaks to the sheer utter arrogance and the insensitivity to the people who actually have their cars stolen. Not everybody can turn around and buy a new car. This causes real hardship, and there are very few rentals available even to get somebody through that period. For businesses, it impacts productivity, for which Canada has a real problem. All that being said, ports are federal infrastructure, and there is infrastructure available wherein the CCANs can go through an arch, and as it goes through, scan not just an X-ray, they can actually detect the contents by material. So it could scan for radioactivity, drugs, and human smuggling. And I think everyone on this committee would agree that human smuggling is far more important, but equally important when it comes to the theft of cars. So for that reason, I believe this motion should pass.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gallant. Next, I have Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly don't dispute the importance of this topic, nor the importance of the motion in front of us. I think, there's a number of different things going on. There is going to be a debate in the House on this topic. I think it's a topic that does concern a lot of people, particularly in central Canada and around the Port of Montreal in particular. But the Port of Vancouver as well. My concern is that this committee has other business that we want to get onto, and folks will remember from the last meeting that I'm particularly interested in the conservative study on the Lake Erie Connector, which I hope we can get to after we deal with our study on the rights of people living with disabilities who are trying to travel by air in Canada and are facing barriers. Those are also important topics to a lot of Canadians. And so, if at every meeting we have additional concurrence motions that take up the committee's time, we're not going to be able to get to those topics, which, in terms of importance, I'm not going to argue which one is relatively more or less important than another, other than that this committee can do some good work together, and it has in the past. And I'm hoping that we can continue to do that as long as we sit here at this table together. So in the interest of trying to get us through this and towards a consensus, and because I do believe that we've heard that everyone around the table is concerned about this issue of auto theft, I would propose an amendment to change the wording of the last sentence to read, "The committee expresses its concern with these reports and calls on the government to immediately address these resource shortages as the CBSA falls under the federal government's mandate."
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. So,
And I don't know if the clerk would like that in writing, but
Yes, if you won't mind.
okay.
Okay, so we have an amendment proposed by Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach will suspend for 2 minutes while you can get that to the clerk. And we'll make sure that it's distributed to all members, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Okay, this meeting is suspended until we are able to get that information from Mr. Bachrach. The change is quite small, colleagues. I don't think we need it unless it's a request of the committee, but I don't think we need it to be distributed in both official languages. It's essentially just a changing of or the addition of one word and the removal of 4 words. So in English, the second paragraph would state the committee express its concern instead of report to the House its concern. And en français, le comité exprime des inquiétudes.
The committee expresses its concern and we remove rather than reporting to the House. So there were 5 words in French. Yes, 5 in French and 4 in English.
On the amendment proposed by Mr. Backrack. Does anybody want to speak to that? Yes, Mr. Strahl.
Yes, I think that we believe that reporting to the House is the more official response from this committee, and that's why we selected the wording the way that we did. Expressing our concern doesn't compel the government to respond in any way. They can ignore this without even having to respond. We know that they've certainly ignored recommendations from this committee in the past, but at least we've forced them to explain themselves when that happens. So we believe that by issuing that simple report, that it is the official way to register our concern and compel the government to respond. So we will be voting against this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. I have no one else on the list, so we'll go to a vote on Mr. Strahl's amendment. Mr. Backrack, excuse me, his amendment.
Mr. Beto?
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono?
Oui.
Madame Koutrakis?
Oui.
Miss Murray?
Yes.
Oui.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers, can you hear us?
Yes.
You're voting on the motion. Okay. Yes. Mr. Strahl?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Ms. Galland?
No.
Mr. Lewis? Monsieur Barsalou Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
The amendment is carried. We'll now go on to discussion on the motion as amended. Seeing none. We will
No,
go
Mr.
to,
Chair.
oh, sorry, Mr. Strahl, go ahead.
I guess my question for you, perhaps, Mr. Chair, is how does the committee express its concern to the House, or is that not part of the motion? Is it just say express its concern? I guess I'm wondering what is the method by which we express that, other than perhaps by the passing of this motion, or is there actually something that officially communicates our concern from this committee to the government, which we've now, thanks to Liberal NDP in the bloc, we've removed the official nature of a report from this motion. What would actually be the effect of this now? How would we express that to the House? And so I'm looking for actual, this isn't entirely rhetorical, but I would like to know how exactly that is expressed now that it will not be done via an official report.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. I've conferred with the clerk, and the simple act of adopting the motion is the way it's expressed, but there won't be any official communique, letter, or report. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Backrack, who had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And I would be happy if the committee wanted to write a letter to the minister, to the prime minister, to the government. I think all of that is fine. And, I don't on principle object to the use of concurrence motions, but what we've seen is that every committee gets piled up with these motions demanding a government response and a debate in the House, and it prevents us as Parliament from doing other work. And I wouldn't assume nefarious motives, except that those motives have been clearly stated. And, it's been clearly stated that they're going, certain parties are going to do everything that they can to obstruct the work of Parliament. And as a parliamentarian, I don't think that's in the public interest. So That's why I moved that we remove that particular wording from the motion. I still think it's a very important topic, and the committee should express its view on it. And if it's the will of the committee, I would certainly agree to writing a letter to share the outcome of the vote on the motion with the government.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Muse, followed by Mr. Strahl.
Yeah, I think the removal of the report to the House neuters this, and I think that that really is an inappropriate signal to Canadians who are afflicted with this issue. I mean, if you've got your vehicle stolen, as Ms. Gallant pointed out, you may not be able to get a rental. There's a financial hardship there. This is impacting businesses as well in terms of productivity, and she's quite correct. Productivity is certainly an issue in the Canadian economy, and you know, on top of that, $1.2 billion in insurance premiums paid out. That's $500 per Canadian household. Sorry, $500 in terms of increase in insurance premiums that is being seen by many Canadians. In Ontario, it's higher. So this is something that's a serious issue, and it's all happening through a federally regulated port on federally regulated railways. It has had a sharp increase in the last number of years, and to not report that to the House, not take it that seriously, I think is a mistake, and is an affront to those Canadians impacted by it.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Ms. Gallant.
I thought there was somebody after me, but the money arising, the profits from the theft of vehicles is known to be used to fund terrorism. And we've talked in different departments that it must be a whole of government approach when it comes to combating terrorism. We have it here at home as well. So to have the Transport Committee appear to just wash its hands of the issue of stolen vehicles and the export of them is, you make it sound like all it is a hunk of metal going from point A to inside one border to point B outside the border. This is real lives we're talking about, humanitarian crises that are happening around the world, and the proceeds of this crime are going towards funding wars.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gallant. Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much. And there's a lot of statements being made that, again, they don't want to call experts. They're making these statements, and perhaps they're true. But if these statements are true, and perhaps they are, combating terrorism, this money going to foreign governments to fund wars, I think Ms. Gallant will want to speak to her Conservative colleagues on the Public Safety Committee that if filibustering at every opportunity are attempts to get to that study. Even filibustering, bringing in additional motions similar to this, even though there's a study on the books already. And it's just the Conservatives flailing their arms trying to cripple Parliament is what we're seeing here. Ms. Gallant accused me of a filibuster. I must admit it must have been the world's worst filibuster. I think I spoke for 5 minutes. I think she's spoken longer than I have. But I really think she needs to speak to her colleagues on the Public Safety Committee, because that's where this motion and a comprehensive study on it is currently sitting. And we need to get through Bill C-26, which is cybersecurity. In that case, we've heard from experts that money from cyber attacks are being used to fund foreign governments, are being used to fund wars and conflict, and countries like North Korea. What are the Conservatives doing on that? A Conservative party that cares about security, or pretends to anyways, they're filibustering it. Filibustering witnesses who appear that Parliament's paying to fly in, making them sit there, making them watch on filibuster debates, one after another after another. So I appreciate the crocodile tears from the Conservative Party that those of us on the other side of the table aren't taking this seriously. When the chips are down on the Public Safety Committee, it's the Conservatives that don't care. It's the Conservatives that are not showing that they want to see action. They want to hear from experts. Here, we just have a motion that is a one-liner that we can send to the House of Commons to cripple debate, and continue their obstruction in the House of Commons. It's disappointing. Canadians deserve better. So again, I hope the members here, and maybe it's not Ms. Gallant, maybe it's the other Conservative members, please speak to your members on the Public Safety Committee. I really want to get to that study. And I don't want to do this piecemeal like a one-line report. Let's hear from RCMP. Let's hear from CBSA, port officials, experts on criminal justice. Let's actually find out. Maybe Ms. Gallant's right. Maybe this money is going to fund terrorism. And if that's the case, why doesn't she want her colleagues to stop filibustering on the Public Safety Committee to get to that thorough study that Mr. Strahl, and I believe him, says he wants, even though his motion for a study is, I think it's 1 meeting, 2 witnesses. It's pretty weak tea from the Conservatives that pretend to care about public safety. It's clearly Liberals, NDP, and Bloc that care about this issue, that want a significant study to look at the actual details so we can provide recommendations. We need to be better on this as a country at all levels of government. This is municipal police forces, provincial police services, RCMP, CBSA. We need to be looking at this from a holistic perspective. And it's easy and it's great for fundraising emails to say, oh, it's the federal government's fault. And there's some opportunities that we need to address. But if you're not going to do it in a serious way, it just shows how unserious the Conservative Party is on issues of security, on a lot of different issues. Pound the table, get angry. For example, housing is another example that during question period, there's 45 minutes that the Conservatives pretend to care about housing, pretend to care about security. But when it gets to actual items, tangible items, nowhere to be found. Filibustering, obstruction, and that's all this motion is. So it's truly disappointing once again to watch the Conservatives go down this path. They used to be serious on issues of public safety, not anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. I have Ms. Koutrakis followed by Mr. Strahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to request a brief suspension, if I may, of the meeting, because we would like to discuss amongst ourselves some issues before coming back and continuing the debate.
Okay, we have a brief suspension requested by Ms. Koutrakis. I will oblige. We'll give 5 minutes and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. This meeting is now suspended. Next on the list, we had Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, I note with some interest the governing parties always complain about the opposition parties bringing forward concurrence debates. I would ask Mr. Bachrach to go back. I know he wasn't elected in the time of Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair when they were the official opposition, but I can assure him that this tool to bring forward issues was utilized with great frequency. Same with Mr. Biddle, who wasn't here when they were the third party. Concurrence motions are a valid tool of Parliament. They are very much one of the ways to bring attention to a serious matter, and so was a report to the House where the chair actually stands in the chamber and tables a report during routine proceedings. So, Mr. Bachrach may want a strongly worded letter or moderately worded letter or a letter with no emotions attached to it whatsoever. We think that the report was the way to go, which is why we moved it that way. I can appreciate the theater here of pretending that conservatives don't want to actually address this issue. Of course we do, which is why we brought it forward, which is why we believe it should have been treated substantially with a report to express our concern about the parts of this that relate to the mandate of this committee, which is oversight and keeping holding the government to account on issues that are within our purview, which include ports, which include railways, both of which are implicated in the organized crime scheme that steals vehicles from the driveways of law-abiding Canadians and ships them via the Port of Montreal. We simply thought that should be reported to the House, our concern and our desire for additional resources to be provided. We know that there's a budget coming up. We know that the government is evaluating their priorities, and we believe that priority, as indicated by this committee, should be to give CBSA more resources so that they can do their job of preventing the property of Canadians being shipped abroad to be used by organized crime through the Port of Montreal. So we don't apologize for wanting that to be done in a formal way, where it could be discussed in the House and where the seriousness of this matter was registered with the House, as opposed to through a simple motion here, which will go no further, or a letter from the clerk or the chair, which requires no response from the minister or the government. So it's disappointing that this has been watered down, and that it seems that is the direction that the committee wants to go, is to not have the force of a report, but to simply take note of something. We believe that the report would have put some more significant weight behind it to express that concern. So it's disappointing that that's where this is going.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. I have Mr. Biddle.
I reached out to a friend of mine who's in the know, and her response was that it's false that there are only 5 officers that are engaged in this. So we don't have the facts. There's dispute amongst the facts. This is why the importance of the public safety study, which the Conservatives are filibustering C-26, again, to focus on cybersecurity, which I know, and I take Ms. Gallant at her word in terms of worried about money going to terrorist entities or bad state actors that Canada is not allied with. That's actually happening on the cyber front. So that's being filibustered to prevent us to get to a thorough study. And it's great to take a headline and put it into a motion and say this is fact. We could have witnesses here. And the Conservatives don't want that. It was interesting to hear from Mr. Strahl talk about the good old days of the 41st Parliament. I'm sure he remembers fondly the Conservative cuts to CBSA. I believe it was about 1,000 CBSA jobs that were cut during their time in office. That's interesting. and you can send it to my personal email account, the motions like this, I'm sure he voted on, and that were NDP motions like this that were just set up concurrence debate. I'm sure that was permitted quite a bit. So there is work being done by the government. There's work being done Parliament. It's, I know, Liberal government working with the Conservative government in Ontario. Big announcement in terms of money for a response to this. Looking forward to the outcome of the Auto Theft Summit. And I really want to get to the public safety study on auto theft. And let's hear from all of these witnesses. Mr. Strahl is right. A concurrence motion is an appropriate tool. It's in the rules. But the way the Conservatives using it is just to shut down debate, shut down the important work that Canadians expect us to do. And the motion at public safety was unanimous in terms of having a thorough study on the subject. Let's get to that. So I'm sure Mr. Strahl, after this meeting, is going to get on the phone with his colleagues on the Public Safety Committee and insist that they end their filibuster tactics and get us to a point where we can actually debate something important and come up with actual recommendations from actual experts rather than ripping a headline that may or may not be true and basing that on a motion for a concurrence debate in the House of Commons, which I guess Mr. Strahl is now admitting is the tactic at play. So I can't. All this to say, I can't support this motion since it's based on incorrect information, despite being a serious issue. Let's do it properly. Let's get to the study at public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. I have Ms. Katrakis followed by Ms. Gallant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that, everyone that's watching this very important meeting today and this very important discussion understands that no one is saying that this subject is not an important subject. In fact, if you look at what the government recently announced with a summit, the government takes this issue very, very carefully and very strongly, but we want to make sure that we are going to be receiving proper and factual information. I think that we as parliamentarians and everyone around this table are responsible, and our obligation is to always provide clear and factual information to Canadians so they fully understand the subject matter. We can all sit around this table and filibuster and talk things out, but I don't think that Canadians sent us with that in mind. I think that Canadians sent a strong message when they said we expect our parliamentarians from every stripe, opposition members, government members, we need to work together and to deal with very important, subjects such as auto theft. Every single one of us around here is touched by increased prices of insurances, and no one is saying otherwise. But we also have a lot of other studies and a lot of other important work that we have prioritized in previous messages. So, to drop that very important work that's already in the queue, and to, we've got the high frequency rail, we've got the, air passengers. Mr. Bachrach earlier spoke about his study on passengers' rights with disabilities. There's so many other studies that are waiting in the queue that are equally important. So I think, the government is willing, the government has shown that this is a top priority for it, and it wants to get the proper information, and we want to speak to the officials that need to be spoken to and to get to the bottom of this. Nobody is saying that we want this to continue and to help, terrorism financing. Obviously, this is not something that's acceptable to anyone. But we also have to make sure that we're giving the proper information so that Canadians know exactly what is happening. And from a policy perspective, if we don't have the proper information and the proper facts, then, clearly any policy that's put forth would be flawed. So I know that I'm speaking for everyone, all my colleagues around this table, that is not something that we want. And we want to make sure that, you know, if and when this issue does come back to transport, and there's nothing to say that it cannot come back to transport at a future date. But I think that, you know, let's not put the horse before the cart. Let's see what comes out of this summit. You know, we're going to be hearing. I mean, the government came out and said they want to bring all the officials and all the stakeholders together to talk about this issue. So I think that it would be wise that we wait to see what comes out of this summit, and at the same time, we can continue to speak to our own stakeholders, and we can have our conversations with the officials that are in a much better position to provide us with facts rather than just hypotheses. So with that said, Mr. Chair, I would like to motion the adjournment of this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Katrakis. I'll turn it over to the chair, to the clerk.
Mr. Biddle?
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono?
Oui.
Madame Koutrakis?
Yes.
Ms. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Straw?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Ms. Galland?
No, and I'm really disappointed we didn't get to work on the study we were supposed to on the McKinsey.
Mr. Lewis?
No.
Monsieur Barcelo-Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack? 7 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion carries. This meeting is adjourned.